All craftsmen fight a running war with rust. Rust is an electrochemical reaction that takes place between three substances: the steel in your tools, the oxygen in the air, and the humidity that is everywhere in the environment. You take a nice shiny saw like this, and you leave it out in the weather, and pretty soon it turns into an ugly saw like that. You take a nice shiny hand plane like this, and you keep it in your shed or your garage for too long, and it turns into a ball of rust like that. Well, there are ways to prevent this, and I'm going to talk about each one of them in turn. Perhaps the easiest way to prevent rust is to take some of the humidity out of your shop, and you can do this with a dehumidifier. This is a comparatively inexpensive appliance that just sort of sucks the moisture out of the air, and it deposits it in a bucket or a container right here. That's a lot of water, and you have to empty these things every so often. Or you can set up your dehumidifier for continuous drainage by poking a hole through a wall and running a hose to the outside. Another change you can make in the environment is to use your dust collector a little more often and keep it clean. You see, sawdust is hygroscopic. It attracts moisture. And so as the sawdust settles on your tools, so does the moisture, and that creates rust. So a little less sawdust, a little less rust. One of the best ways to keep your tools free of sawdust and to prevent rust is to keep them in enclosed spaces: drawers, cabinets, toolboxes. This is a tool shrine that I built some years back for the tools that I don't use all that often, and I don't want them laying around the shop and collecting dust. Inside, they stay relatively sawdust free. This helps prevent the rust and keeps the tools cleaner. If you keep your tools in an enclosed space, consider putting a camphor tablet in the space with those tools. Tool steel remains about 2 degrees Fahrenheit below the ambient room temperature. This camphor evaporates, it outgasses, and the gases recondense on the cool tool steel, coating it with a very thin layer, just a molecule thick, of camphor oil. This seals the tools against the humidity in the air, prevents them from rusting. If you're going to do this, however, make sure you get real camphor. Don't get naphthalene or dichlorobenzene, which is often substituted for camphor. These won't work, not for this application anyway, and they're toxic as well. But the camphor does a surprisingly good job. For those tools that you can't keep in enclosed spaces, or don't want to, consider coating the exposed surfaces with wax, paste wax. I like to apply the paste wax with a little bit of Scotch-Brite. This helps polish the steel and removes any rust that might have been budding there on the surface. After you get done applying the wax, however, make sure that you buff it out. You don't want the wax recombining with sawdust. That just is begging for more rust to happen. Another advantage of the wax is it helps the workpieces slide smoothly across the surface. Your saws and your joiners, your planers, they'll all work better with a coating of wax on the surfaces. For tools that have a lot of cracks and crevices, it makes them hard to wax, and for tools that you don't use very often, you can either wipe them down with oil or you can spray them with oil. When choosing an oil, make sure you get something without a lot of detergent. Some of these detergents can cause reactions that will result in rust. Also, avoid silicon. Silicon can get on your wood, and it really plays havoc with your finishes. I like to use mineral oil, just a natural oil that doesn't have anything else in it but mineral oil. If you spray on an oil, you might want to take a look at this old standby, WD-40. WD stands for water displacement, and this was the 40th chemical formula that the Rocket Chemical Company came up with in 1953 to prevent rust on aerospace surfaces. In fact, our first intercontinental ballistic missiles, the Atlas missile, was sprayed with WD-40 to prevent it from rusting, and it still works pretty well. You just spray it on and wipe off the excess, and that should protect it for a long time. My last tip is not so much about rust prevention as it is from just nipping the rust in the bud before it gets out of hand. Around my shop, I usually keep a selection of these Scotch-Brite pads. These are abrasive pads. They come in several different flavors. The green one is about 240 grit, the red one about 320, and the light gray one about 600. And as you can well imagine, they are differently aggressive. The green one is most aggressive. I usually start with the red one just to see what will happen. I've got this old rusty 2 cherries saw here, and I'm going to remove some of the rust with the red one. You can see it gets most of the rust. I might, for that little bloom right there, I might have to go to the green. Yeah, it's going to take some work, but I'll get it. It's also useful for the shanks of router bits and drills. When these sit around for a while, they can just start to naturally rust. You don't want to wax them or oil them because that would prevent the collets from gripping them. So you take some Scotch-Brite, and that's all it needs. It needs to be shiny. Now I'm gonna switch from the red stuff to the black flavor just to make it even shinier, and that will help increase the coefficient of friction between the collet and the shank. Really give it a tight grip. Now, in addition to Scotch-Brite, I also keep around these rust erasers. These are either aluminum oxide or silicon carbide grit embedded in a rubber pad so that you can use them just like you would an eraser and get that rust out of there. You can see that shine developing. There we go. Very handy. You want to attack these rust blooms early on because these rust blooms can become a whole jungle if you don't, like I said, nip them in the bud.